a volunteer in the archives at the Wayne County Historical Society of Ohio, and we would like to introduce you to the famous Wayne County artist you never heard about. Let me preface this presentation by stating I am not any type of art expert. I have never stepped one foot in a formal or famous art gallery and never took any art history classes, and it was only through thorough research that we have uncovered an extraordinary connection between a famous, for his time, early American artist and Wayne County, Ohio. I say for his time, as I'm guessing the majority of you have never heard of him, as we are talking about 175-year-old American art that is less than popular nowadays. But I'm hoping you all will leave with a greater appreciation for this type of art and get to know more about the most famous Wayne County artist you never heard about before. This past year has been highlighted by some extraordinary changes at the Historical Society, with the opening of the new permanent collection exhibit area running underneath the campus. Included in that space is a section dedicated to exhibit some of the Society's works of art, the majority of which are fine art portrait paintings by local artist Michael Nachtrieb. Many of these portraits have not been seen in years, and many had been languishing in storage for 20 years or more, simply because there was not an adequate area in which to display them. As items started to be removed from storage to go out on display in the new permanent collection exhibit area, nobody really knew how many portraits the Society had in its collection, as the last formal inventory, according to our records, was done by local volunteer Mary Buss, and the inventory survey sent to the Smithsonian and recorded between 1987 and 1988, which coincided with the last time any of the Nachtrieb portraits were formally exhibited at the Society. The portraits were scattered among various overflowing storage areas at the Society, and they quickly realized there were more portraits than anybody knew about in the collection. Problems were encountered right off the bat. Many of the identifying tags had fallen off the portraits, some tags were missing altogether, and some portraits could not be found, although records indicated we were supposed to have them. Then we had the portraits we did not know we had, as they had no recorded paperwork. The Permanent Collection Committee started to discuss the possibility of deaccessioning and trimming down the portrait collection. However, other members questioned how you can get rid of a portrait if you don't know who is depicted in the portrait, if it was formally accessioned into the collection, or anything about the portrait. Therefore, our committee decided to take a full inventory of the Society's fine art portrait paintings, identify the people in the portraits, present a short history about them, find when the work was received, who donated the portrait, and identify the artist, if possible. While researching Michael Nachtrieb, we came across an 1885 newspaper article in which it stated Nachtrieb was a longtime pupil of Frank Reinhardt, one of the foremost portrait artists in America. Of course, we did what any modern-day person would do. We Googled the name Frank Reinhardt, and nothing came back. We didn't think much of it and moved on in our research. Then, while researching Charles Gashi, the book Ohio Arts and Artists by Edna May Clark stated that Gashi studied under Reinhardt in New York. Then we came across an 1879 news clip that stated that local artist Joshua C. Smith was a student of celebrated Reinhardt of New York. After finding 3 local references to some artist named Reinhardt of New York, we decided we'd better Google him again, and this time using the spelling of Reinhardt found in the Gashi and Smith references. It took a few tries to find this famous New York artist, but we eventually found out Frank was short for Franklin, and that was his middle name. When we finally discovered his full name, it turned out to be none other than Benjamin Franklin Reinhardt, who usually signed his portraits simply B.F. Reinhardt, if he bothered to sign them at all. If you look at any number of his Wikipedia pages, this is what you'll find out about him. Benjamin Franklin Reinhardt was an American painter born near Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, known for his genre, historical, and portrait paintings. From 1847 to 1850, he studied at the National Academy of Design in New York, spending his summers in Hayesville, Ohio. He studied art abroad in Rome, Paris, and Dusseldorf, and upon his return to the United States, traveled throughout the American Midwest producing historical paintings and portraits. At the outbreak of the American Civil War, he moved to London, England, and became known for his genre and religious paintings. After the Civil War, he returned to America and settled in New York City at the National Academy of Design, where he became an elected member in 1871 and held many exhibits of his artwork. He died in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1885. Reinhardt was also the uncle of artist Charles Stanley Reinhardt. So you're probably wondering, what does this guy have to do with Worcester and Wayne County, Ohio? But let's look back over this biography. You might have missed it. From 1847 to 1850, he spent his summers in Hayesville, Ohio. We all know Hayesville is in Ashland County. It's close to Wayne County, but was never in Wayne County. In fact, it was originally in Richland County. This connection was starting to bother us, so we decided to keep poking around in the old local newspapers. We found an 1885 death announcement for Reinhardt in the Wayne County Democrat that stated, "The artist B.F. Reinhardt, formerly of Worcester, died last Tuesday at his home in Philadelphia. When residing in Worcester as a portrait painter, his studio was in the Iron Block, in the room now occupied by Daniel Funk's insurance office. For years he has lived in New York City and was one of the leading artists in Harper's Weekly and also for magazines." For those of you that don't know or remember, we know the Iron Block as the Amster Building, which stands right next to the courthouse. There it is in black and white. The famous American artist Benjamin Franklin Reinhardt was painting portraits in Worcester, Ohio. Of course, this opened up a whole can of worms, questions. When did he live here? Where did he live? When did he work here? Are there any surviving works of B.F. Reinhardt in Wayne County, in Worcester? The local newspapers came to our rescue again. Printed over 2 issues of the Worcester Republican newspaper in November of 1872 was an extraordinary biography of Benjamin Franklin Reinhardt, printed right on the front page, in which the author had interviewed Reinhardt personally to put together this biography. He subtitled, "How a Poor Farmer's Boy Became an Artist." It is a rather long biography, and I would encourage you to read the whole thing when you have a chance, but I'll try to summarize and point out the important parts that pertain to his time in Wayne County. Benjamin Franklin Reinhardt was born in 1829 in Greene County, Pennsylvania, the youngest son of 9 children from Joseph Reinhardt and Sarah Smith. That same year, his father, who had been living comfortably, suddenly went bankrupt after supplying security for some friends' loans in which they defaulted. After honestly paying these debts off, Joseph Reinhardt found himself an aged man of nearly 60, having to start all over again on a capital of a few $1,000s. Rather than sitting around and complaining about his ill fortune, he decided to move on, to move westward into the wild lands of Ohio. Joseph Reinhardt bought a large tract of wild land in Greene Township, Richland County, Ohio. In 1846, this township became part of Ashland County, the price of which was low enough to be easily paid even out of the scanty remnants of his money. However, this land was still wild and heavily forested. You have to remember, many of these areas were still occupied by American Indians. There were no roads and no easy way to even find the land you bought, and it would take years to clear enough trees to create land to farm. Therefore, Joseph Reinhardt did not take his family and settle on the land he bought. Instead, he leased a farm east of their Richland County land in Mohican Township, Wayne County, Ohio, for 7 years. In 1846, Mohican Township became a part of Ashland County when Ashland County was formed. And it is on this Mohican Township farm, between 1830 and 1837 that Benjamin Franklin Reinhardt grew up in what was then a part of Wayne County, Ohio. The earliest years of the future successful painter were passed amid the picturesque forests, privations, and excitements of a pioneer home. Benjamin loved to talk about their rude log cabin with its troops of guardian dogs, of the return home of the hunters laden with the spoils of the chase, and of the occasional attacks of wolves, bears, and coyotes, which still infested the forest wilderness and endangered the lives of the settlers at the time. His earliest recollection of drawing was when one of his elder brothers was the captain of a company of mounted militia which occasionally assembled at the farm for a drill parade. Having watched them go through their maneuvers all one autumn afternoon, Franklin sat in the evening twilight on the clean plank floor of the kitchen and looked into the log fire, and he strove to recall in the moving frames the strangely dressed figures which had so strongly impressed his fancy. And then the wish came to see them again with the eye of sense, as he saw them still with the eye of fancy. Nor were the means wanting. He took one of the charred sticks that lay extinguished at the outer verge of the fire, and endeavored to trace out on the cabin floor the form of a rustic soldier. After a few attempts, he achieved this with very fair success, and soon even attained the height of depicting his cavalrymen in the act of brandishing a drawn sword. At this time, he states he was only 3 years old, and determined the date by the fact that he remembers distinctly his mother was at the time making his first pair of breeches. From then on, his favorite toy was a blackened piece of wood. Endless were the scoldings he got from his parents for his outrageous and persistent attacks on the floor, and constant was the delighted admiration of his brothers as he gradually mastered new forms and successfully depicted wolves and bears and dogs and Indians and other interesting elements of life in the wilderness. When he grew a little older, and when the country began to be somewhat more thickly peopled, young Reinhardt, who had by this time learned the use of pencils and paper, amused himself by sketching the likenesses of his neighbors, not too infrequently infusing a vein of boyish humor into his work. One of these performances drew upon him the notice of his father and did much to mold the future of his boyhood. He was about 7 years old when one Saturday night a worthless old good-for-nothing, who had wandered to Ohio from Baltimore, Maryland, and gained food and shelter by officiating as a local schoolmaster, came to the Reinhardt homestead to indulge in a glass of whiskey punch and a chat. He was the oracle of the community, and even the elder Reinhardt, though a gentleman of education and intelligence and of some worldly experience, yielded him the palm in political and social discussions. About a dozen or more of the rural gossip had assembled in a festive conclave, and the old schoolteacher was laying down the law with remarkable vigor and effort. Young Franklin listened and watched with great interest until the spirit of art descended upon him, and then he stole away unobserved to a corner of the room and quickly sketched the most prominent figure of the group. It was an admirable caricature, and when he showed it to his brothers, they laughed so loudly that the curiosity of the older folks was aroused, and they insisted on seeing the sketch. Everyone marveled at the fidelity of the likeness, and the old schoolteacher himself, taking the matter in good humor, said that young Reinhardt ought to be sent to Baltimore and educated as an artist, and that he would then become rich and famous. These words sunk deep into the minds of both the boy and his father.